personal thing. It's a personal thing. It's not. Good afternoon. We are going to call this meeting to order at 9:04. Before we begin, I did want to have some opening words. Ms. Saavedra, since her apologies, she couldn't be here. One of her really close friends passed away last month and is out for the services today. So she wishes she could be here, but we wanted to definitely respect that. And for the trustees that were here when Ms. Saavedra was hired, her friend was actually one of the ones that came with her to sign her contract, and we actually got to meet her. So, our heart goes out to her and her family. And before we begin, I'd actually like to open with a moment of silence. I was just informed that Mr. Wiggs has run into some health issues as well. So as we look at Ms. Saavedra and Mr. Wiggs, if we could just enter a moment of silence. Thank you. And with that, Mr. Sheffield, Ms. Aguirre, I yield the floor to y'all.
Good morning, Board President Arabali, board members. We're here today to give a board budget update. Presenting today will be our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Martha Aguirre, and she'll introduce the other participants as we proceed. Ms. Aguirre.
Good morning. Thank you, Board President Irovali, Mr. Sheffield, board members. So this is our second workshop that is scheduled for our budget development process. As you might understand, there's a lot of processes, reviews, and meetings that are being held to discuss and evaluate how we will present to you a final budget on June 18th. And so if you see the booklet that we've provided to you on page 2, we've got 4 agenda items that are noted. We've got our fiscal year 2024 financial forecast, and I have to share with you that just as we're preparing for next year's budget, it's also very critical that we evaluate what our current financial status is and where we stand as we start projecting for the end of the fiscal year on June 30th, 2024. So as we start with that item, I have Ms. Maria Alonso, our Executive Director of Financial Services, that will provide you an overview of our current budget. And if you can turn to page 4 of your booklet, that gives you the summary, and she'll start going into some of the details.
Thank you, Ms. Aguirre. Good morning, Board President Irobali, members of the board, Mr. Sheffield, ladies and gentlemen. Maria Alonso, Executive Director of Financial Services. And just like Ms. Aguirre mentioned, before we move to next year's budget, let's take a look at where we are today at our current year, fiscal year 24. So what we have before you today is our financial forecast for our general operating fund. This would be for this current year ending June 30th of 2024. So we begin on the left-hand side, that first numerical column, FY24 adopted budget. So this is the board-approved balanced budget that was approved for the current fiscal year at $542.9 million. That next column is our FY24 amended budget. That represents any amendments brought before the board for the current year. It also includes roll forwards from the previous year. So on the top, on our general fund revenue, the largest budget amendment brought last month to the board was in relation to the change in the homestead exemption from $40,000 to $100,000. And so what we did there was a $44 million budget amendment. We moved our local property tax revenue into our state revenue. So as you all remember, as the one goes up, the other one goes down in the formula, in the state formula. At the expenditure level, we have an amended expenditure budget of $572.2 million. And of course, the majority of this includes roll forward funds from the previous year, primarily for the maintenance tax notes that we have for El Paso High School. It also includes purchase order roll forward, as well as amendments brought before the board. When we're going to discuss some of those amendments as we review fund balance on the next slide in a few moments. Oh, yes, sorry. Right here, look. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Our next column in blue is our forecast general fund revenue column. And I'll make this a little bigger there. As big as it gets. So on the top, we have our forecast. Again, we used our year-to-date activity as of February 29th, and then we did a forecast from March through the end of the fiscal year. So overall, our forecast right now for our revenues are at $527.9 million. And our forecast for our expenses is at $544.4 million. Below the line, under other sources and uses, we have the remarketing of our El Paso High variable maintenance tax note, as well as the sale of some district properties. That next column is our variance budget versus actual. And what that is, it's the calculation of our amended budget versus our blue column, which is our forecast column. This column basically represents whether we will be on budget, on target, over or under, okay? As we begin our analysis on the at the local level for our revenues, we do see a positive variance there of $1,012,175. And that's primarily attributed, one, that our taxes are coming in very strong. Two is the interest earnings that we've earned throughout the year. So our investment pools have earned an average of 5.5%, and so that has maintained steady. We do anticipate that the Fed will drop the rates on the second half of this calendar year.
Can you highlight where you're referring to? You kind of lost me a little bit.
Yes, of course.
There's a lot going on here.
Let me see here. Trying to make it a little bigger. No, I don't know. I was hoping for a mouse here, but where is it?
Sorry to throw you off your game. I just didn't want to get totally lost here.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Oh, gosh.
Okay, hold on.
Go back this way. Okay,
Okay.
there you go. So we're still focused on the top revenue section and the variance budget versus actual. That's where she currently is.
Oh,
That
okay.
second to last column on the very top. So that $1,012,000, and just a quick overview is, again, I mentioned that our taxes coming in strong, and then as well as our interest earnings at 5.5%. That's what our investment pools have earned on average. And then we do anticipate the rates to decrease on the second half of this calendar year. At the state level, we do have our revenues coming in under our amended budget at $14.1 million there. Now, this is primarily attributed to two things. The first one is our ADA, and the second part is, we talked a little bit about that increase in the homestead exemption. And basically, the idea is that the state offsets that amount to school districts, but it is not dollar for dollar. So within the formula, we actually come in short, the way the formula is designed. At the federal level, we also come in under our amended budget by $697,000 there. And this one is primarily two things. The first one is that there was a federal audit for the SHAR's revenue at the state level. So for the state of Texas, they had a federal audit, and there is an amount due back to the federal government. So what the state has done is push that down to school districts. Right now, we anticipate that that will be about $2 million that the district will have to, will not be receiving in revenue. The second component here is our impact aid revenue is actually coming in really strong, so it's offsetting some of that shortage in our SHAR's revenue. Okay. At the expenditure on this variance column, we have an overall positive variance of $27.9 million. And let me see if I can lower this.
And if I can just interject, under the impact aid, just yesterday, we received another payment of $2.1 million of impact aid. So that's definitely going to help our projection as we look at our revenue to close the year.
So at the expenditure level, on that second to last column, we do have a positive variance of $27.9 million. Under function 11, I'll put this up a little bit. Okay, under function 11, we have about a $7 million positive variance there. And so what we have seen as a district, an opportunity to reallocate some of the funds from general fund into our ESSER grant. That grant is coming to an end on September 30th, and so we have seen that opportunity for about $8 million to move from operating into that ESSER fund. So that's why you see that 7,051,684 positive variance there in that, under function 11. The next largest variance is under function 81. Under function 81, that second to last column there, we do have a positive variance of 13,195,740. And the majority of those funds are roll forward funds related to our maintenance tax notes. So you'll continue to see that until those projects are completed and those funds are exhausted. Below the line there, you'll see that $4.8 million. That is a budget amendment that will be coming to the board in May to reflect the sale of some properties here at the district. Now, we're going to be talking about fund balance on the next slide, but we did begin the year with $166.6 or $0.7 million, and at this time, we project $158.6 million to close the year. Yes, ma'am, of course.
In regards to the statement, Ms. Aguirre mentioned that 2.1 million aid for, that you said that we just got yesterday. What is that for?
The revenue is impact aid. So
What
the
impact aid?
So impact aid is associated with the federal government provides funding for those properties that are considered federally connected, because federal properties do not pay into our property taxes. So the federal government tries to offset with this, the impact aid is what they refer to. It's not a dollar for a dollar. It's not the same amount of revenue we would get if they paid property taxes. But there is, so through the forms that we ask our students to submit for, to identify how they are, if they are federally connected, whether they work for any federal entity like Homeland Security or any other federal agency. Fort Bliss obviously is one of our big ones. Any type of association where their parents work or parents live on those federal properties, those would be eligible for impact aid if we get that information from our students.
And do we get that on a quarterly basis? or-
So the actual payments kind of vary. I have not been able to track how often they do it, but through the year, we'll get about 3 or 4 payments. We technically thought we were done of receiving our payments. We've made our projected impact revenue, but the good news is we got 2 million more, so.
So next budget meeting, we'll see that impact in the
So,
numbers.
yes, so when we will give you another forecast in June, we're closer to the end of the year and our data will be a lot cleaner. And so, yes, you'll be able to see that additional 2 million in the revenue.
Okay, and I had another question. In regards to a statement that you mentioned that we're gonna move from function 11,
Yes, ma'am.
that 7 million, from ESSER to general fund or from general fund to ESSER?
Yes, Trustee Hernandez. So we anticipate to move from general fund to ESSER. So that positive variance, you see that 7,051,051 is actually going to be $8 million that will be moved from operating into ESSER. And it's just a savings and ways for us to maximize the opportunities that we have with the ESSER funds.
So if I can, as we're nearing the end of the life of ESSER funds, and we're evaluating all our existing programs, and if we're gonna identify savings of sorts through these programs, the team has been working through that. Mr. Vasquez has been working through that process. And so we right now have identified a potential $7 million worth of unused ESSER funds that we can reclass our teachers through June 30th. And so any savings in our local budget goes into our fund balance.
Can I ask a follow-up question on
Sure.
that? So would it be fair to say that next year, we're gonna have a roughly $7 million hole if we're moving
No,
to
because
ESSER?
the proposed budget that we're gonna review for next year has all the staff. ESSER does not exist in next year's budget.
Yep.
And then just to add, I had gone to a conference and for 24, 25, as you probably already know, that the SHAR funding and such for SPED students is going to go down significantly for the whole nation.
So,
So we also need to consider
yes.
the
So
consequences of.
when we review our snapshot for next year, that is one of our impacts to our budget. I will share that the SPED department is working very closely with the new guidance and ensuring that any of the identifications of audit issues that the state was gigged on through the federal government, that we're aligning our reporting so that we don't experience an over-allocation in SHARS. So yes, we are planning for a decrease in SHARS funding.
Okay, thank you.
In relation to SHARS, I know that we said it's a state issue and it's a state audit and there's things, what are the steps to fix that? Is that a state issue that they need to address, or is that a local thing that we can start working towards to tap back into that SHARS funding?
So technically, what the state was identifying in previous years as an allowable expenses to report in our SHARS cost report has changed. And so now the state, so instead of the state just owning the penalty and paying the feds, they're holding districts responsible for it. So as we look to next year in the way we process our SHARS cost report, they're including that guidance that obviously has not, they've removed the guidance or aligned the guidance to align to the federal audit that the state is going through. Because we follow the state guidance with our SHARS cost report.
So the state's adhering to the federal guidelines, which would open that tap of revenue
Correct.
once again? Okay. And then the other thing is, the largest variance for, I guess in a loss is the function 31. And I know we discussed this. Is this because I know part of that strategic blueprint that we did was that we wanted to decrease that student ratio to counselors and invest in that? Is that why we're reflecting a roughly $1 million loss in that?
That is correct. Under function 31, we just need to align the budget to allocate for the counseling so that our staffing ratio is aligned to the strategic blueprint that was proposed and adopted. Additionally, we also we expanded what we call Focus on Children and Family Specialists. Social workers, we expanded the program, which required additional staff. And so it was considered in the budget. As you can see, we just need to align. So in May, I'll bring to you a budget amendment that will clear any potential deficits that we're looking at here. And it's not a deficit, it's just about aligning within the budget. We'll take from other functions that have sufficient budget and align it to where it's needed.
And then just to simplify it for anyone that's within the audience, anyone that's listening, what are we looking at to end the year with? Are we looking at a surplus? Are we looking at a deficit? And I know deficit's not the proper word to use because we just have to realign our existing funds, so we're not really coming out in the hole. We're just have to realign. So what does that look like when we end this fiscal year?
So Ms. Alonso, the next slide will give you that information.
Yes, absolutely. And before we move to that next slide, in regards to your question, President Irobali, on the column here, the blue column, towards the very bottom, under projected surplus deficit, that $8 million that you see there, that is our projected operating deficit that right now we're projecting for the year. Yes, sir. Now, keep in mind that deficit is not necessarily that we budgeted on a deficit, is that we're bringing roll forward from the previous year. So on the maintenance tax notes, we got those funds in a previous fiscal year, but we didn't spend them all in that given year. So we continue to roll those funds forward. So the costs that we spent in the current year, that is in addition to the balanced budget that we approved at the beginning of the year. So keep that in mind when you see these, when you see this operating deficit. It's really carry forward from a previous year that we intended and we planned accordingly so that we can continue to spend those funds. And we'll continue to, like I mentioned, roll forward those funds until those funds are depleted and those projects are fully completed.
Quick question, under other sources and uses, I'm not an accountant, so sometimes these tables throw me off a little bit, but under other sources and other uses in the blue column,
Yes, sir?
we're looking at 26.5 million from other sources, and then other uses at a little over 18 million. Can you explain what goes into that?
Of course. So under the other sources and uses, the majority of that, which is that $18.2 million that you see there, the majority of that is the remarketing that we did of our maintenance tax note for El Paso High. And so there's the way accounting principles work. Basically, you have to record the out as getting rid of the old debt, and then the in as recording the new issue. That's basically under other sources is the in of the 18 million, and then the out under other uses. So it's just a mechanism and a way to record it. The difference on that is about $9 million, and that is the sale of district properties that goes into that other sources row.
Okay. Okay, so the other sources is the 18 or so million dollars that we still owe on the El Paso High stuff that we did a couple years ago, plus the selling of
Properties.
Moorhead. And does Bonham go into that, or is that separate?
It's included in this figure. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Of course.
And the last thing I just want to point out is that if we look at the variance, the loss that we experience from the state and the federal government is actually where we see that loss of $8 million of that deficit. And so as we look at the work that was done last year by the trustees and by staff, we actually had a very good year, but we didn't allocate or account for the amount of loss that we would see from the state level, especially at $14 million. So, I mean, when we look at that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, as we look at just the national rhetoric and the state rhetoric, we actually performed really well this year. Unfortunately, you can't account for what the state's going to do, especially during a legislative session, but kudos to you and your team, because if it wasn't for that $14 million loss, we would actually be ahead this year. And that's pretty significant.
Yes, thank you for that, Trustee Robali. And I'd have to say, and we're going to move into the fund balance, but I do want to say that this is a great forecast. I did attend a conference recently, and a lot of school districts were, really a lot of them in panic mode, to be honest with you, regarding their current year and then looking at their next year. So there was a lot of conversation about that. So I do have to commend the board and the staff for that. It is a really good forecast. And we're going to see right now in our fund balance where we stand. And so it's a good, also a good report. Okay, so this is basically an update of our unrestricted fund balance. Beginning on the top there, we have a representation of where we started the year, and this is only unrestricted fund balance, which means that in the event that the district did not receive any revenue at all, we would use our unrestricted fund balance to conduct operations, okay? So we began the year with $127.9 million. That is equivalent to 88.47 days. So we can operate again if we received no revenue for basically 88 days without any revenue. The line items below it represent current year amendments approved by the board. We begin with that very first one of $10.1 million. That amendment was approved really early on in the year, and the primary purpose of that was to purchase technology, transportation, instructional materials, capital improvement, as well as other expenses. The next line item was a budget amendment presented to the board in January for the sale of district properties for $4,586,837.
And that's the one that records the Moorhead sale, and then the other smaller properties.
But not Bonham.
Not yet.
So the last item there is, represents the Bonham, that is still pending and will be brought before the board in May. That would be the $4.8 million that you see there.
That one will reflect Bonham plus Herrera that the board approved in February, and we just not have posted the actual sale to the system.
Ms. Aguirre, I have a question. In that 4.1 million or 4.5 million, is the property on Railroad included in that? Or has it been sold yet?
Ren Road.
It was on Railroad and Tetons, more or less. It has?
If the board has already approved it, yes, it's part of that 4.5.
The only reason why I ask is because it's around my neighborhood, and I go by there often, and I never saw a sign for sale, and I wasn't sure if it was sold yet.
I can verify for you.
And Ms. Hernandez, I did close on that property.
They did close?
Yeah, I can't remember when, a month ago, 2 months
We
ago?
did sign on
I
that?
had to sign for it, yes, ma'am, so
Oh.
that one is completed.
Okay, thank you.
So if these budget amendments were fully expended and fully recorded as far as the sale of the properties, then we would end the year with 127,187,768. This is if it was fully expended. That $10.1 million amendment for the purchase of technology and various items, that one has been spent up to about $6 million at this time. Just something to keep in mind. So at the bottom level here, we have a calculation as to where we are based on the forecast that was presented today. So just to give you an idea, our general fund expenses there, less our maintenance tax note expenses, is $541.2 million. If we divide that just by 365 days a year, just to come up with a per day expense, our per day expenses are approximately $1,482,668, just to give you an idea what it costs per day to operate the district. And I'm happy to announce that our fund balance number of days at this time will remain the same at 88.47 days. And I do have to say that is really difficult to do with everything that is happening in today's economy and at the state level. And so I do want to, again, as Trustee Rubali mentioned, commend the board, Ms. Saavedra and cabinet leadership, and really administration as a whole for maintaining those efforts. It is, right now, as we project, is to sustain that fund balance at 88.47 days. Now, I did want to mention that the Government Finance Officers Association does recommend a minimum of 2 months of fund balance. And so we are not at 3 months, but it is getting close to that. And so that's something that we need to keep in mind as we see some of the ESSER and other funding ending very soon. So
I just want to jump in for a second on that point, and then I have a question about the $10 million. But as trustees, there's always, every budget cycle, there's certainly pressure to be aggressive in the expenditures of money. And I just want to congratulate everybody here for exercising restraint and giving us a good long-term position. I think my position when it comes to money is always that the long-term is more important than the short-term, and I think that we're reaping the rewards of like a very fiscally conservative long-term play here with the budget. That being said, the 10.1 million, go into a little bit more detail about what we spent that money on, because I remember it was the Google Chromebooks, correct?
Yes, sir.
And what else went into that?
that is actually the bulk of that particular amendment, from what I can recall. It is about approximately $6 million.
I'm actually looking, so it was an amendment that we presented to the board in June. I'm trying to open the amendment itself. But it is capital projects such, whether it's in facilities. We have supported our departments, athletic departments, our fine arts departments with recurring replacement allocations that'll support, the replacement of uniforms, instruments. And so the departments have developed a cycle to replace every year so that we can continue to sustain. In addition to that, we also have a transportation replacement cycle, so that every time we don't fall short and then end up having to replace 30 buses at one time, and each bus on the low end is about 120,000 per bus. So one of the things that we are very proud of is that there's grant opportunities for districts to replace their fleets of buses. And we, at this point, don't qualify because our fleets are so new, and we've converted all our buses to energy efficient, short of electric, energy efficient transportation. And so that's something that we are proud of, because it was a big effort that started about 10 years ago, just to be consistent and support the district and not incur more than we could anticipate any 1 year.
Okay, so it's safe to say then that selling Moorhead and Bonham, plus a couple of other smaller properties, sort of funded this 10.1 million, and it turned out to
In
be a
essence.
wash.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the future, is next time we need to replace all the fine arts and athletics and buses and Chromebooks, is that going to be built into the budget, or are we going to be coming back to the fund balance?
So it's all dependent on how the revenue is we're projecting our revenue based on the state allocations and our enrollments, because those are two big factors that impact the revenue we anticipate. So it's dependent. I can share with you that we are working we're looking at every allocation. I think it's for the third time in the last couple of weeks, Cabinet has really combed through a lot of the asks, and we're really focusing on what is really needed and what are we gonna, as our revenue, we see less revenue coming in, we're trying to support. But long story short, I won't say we're not going to use fund balance, but we would come and have a plan and a presentation to share with you all to help us offset one-time expenditures.
Personally, this is just the way I see it. Like, you're talking about revenue and I'm talking about expenditures. So I know, like, what we can do depends a lot on what the state does for us. But personally, I'd like to see things like that just kind of baked into the budget, just so, because they may seem like one-time expenditures, but to me, they're actually reoccurring expenditures. It's just that there's a gap of, however many years between replacing Chromebooks or replacing buses. I know that kind of stretches the budget somewhat, but I'd like to see that baked in if possible. But that's just my
In
opinion.
an ideal world where the revenue was coming in at least to the same level year over year, that would be something that could be attained. However, with the tax compression that we've experienced over the last, since 2019, and our loss of enrollment of about 1,000 students per year, it really has stretched us very thin. I must say that ADA this current year is also, we projected our 90% ADA, which generates, every percentage point is $3 million in revenue. And so where we anticipated a 90%, and right now we're slightly below, that is also impacting our forecast of less revenue. But I do have our next presenter, Ms. Estrada Batson, that'll give you a little bit of an overview. She's a couple months old into our district, but is already doing a lot of work to enhance our attendance reporting and our systems that'll help our district as a whole when we look at our revenue.
And before we move on, Ms. Aguirre, just to close out this portion, I just try to be as clear as we can, especially as the budget season's happening and all school districts are going through this. Would you say that we are in a very strong financial situation, but we have to anticipate tightening our belt as we overcome these kind of thresholds of impediments, state funding being one, SHARS being another, the uncertainty of a future legislative session in 2025?
That is
Is that
correct.
really what we're looking at as we move downstream while trying to maintain a healthy fund balance?
Yes, that is correct. And as Ms. Alonso mentioned, every conference that you go, 6 months ago to the current, every conference or conversations you're having with colleagues and peers across the state, the deficits are unbelievable. Like, I can't even fathom some of, like, how do you close that gap? And so to say that, when we see our forecasted closure of fiscal year '24 at the same level, a balanced budget with positive to the revenue, when it's all said and done, I feel very strong. I feel very, and I have to say that I appreciate the board support and Ms. Ayavedra's support in really like holding the line, listening to the conversations and the information that's presented, and really in support of knowing that we need to move the district forward and we have a lot of initiatives. We also have to tighten our belt. And when I say Ms. Ayavedra, I really have to say it's Ms. Ayavedra and the team, because when we get together and we say, I know this is what we would like to have, but how do we get middle of the road and still have a positive balance? And so the idea that we've got 88 days in fund balance has really helped us as we move forward. And that fund balance level grew over the last couple of years. It didn't happen overnight, but it was with a lot of effort to make sure that we were ready for this type of scenario.
If I can just add, I don't know, if you want to, you have to turn on your thing.
Can you just speak a little bit about fund balances of other school districts that you're aware of in terms of just number of days?
So I can share that as was mentioned earlier, the GFOA in the state of Texas, when they look at, what is an adequate or, 60 days is what they recommend we at least have. And the importance of having that at least 60 days in fund balance, obviously, is if the state were to stop supporting the districts, we could operate without any revenue coming in. In addition, as districts work to refinance existing debt or go out for new debt, such as a bond, when you go through a credit rating, that is super critical. That is where they look. It's kind of like at home. If you want to purchase a new home or, refinance, they're going to look at your credit, and then based on that, interest rates are impacted and all those things, right? So that's the same case here. Having a strong fund balance obviously gives the district savings in the long run.
Sorry, and I meant just where we are
Compared to others?
locally.
So without my understanding, and I haven't. Yes, I've heard that a couple of districts are below the 60 required days. And so that is, I have to say, unprecedented. I've been operating districts' budgets for 15 years, and I've never seen fund balance levels in any district that low. Everybody would hold on to that, at least that 60-day. And right now, as you hear around the districts, it's below 60 days in a couple of districts, and that's very concerning. We are actually, again, to the good, an extra 28 days from the district standard, from the state standard.
What I just wanted to add, and I'm happy to say, and thank you for the team to put us in a healthy financial position. However, and I've been wanting to say this for a long time, and I'm going to try to be a little bit, I want to be diplomatic about this. I just hope it's not at the expense of other programs. I'm happy to see, I reviewed the packet, that we're not going to be dipping in or cutting into food, to our food department and such, and that to me made me very happy. However, when I hear that sometimes programs don't have the necessary tools or resources to move forward, that to me is troublesome to me, especially when I had a substitute teacher come and tell me that in a SPED program on the west side, the children didn't have any sensory materials. Yes, they're not as able to work as, others, but there was nothing for them to do. And that to me was just troublesome, because I'm hoping we're not cutting back on some programs just to help, our budget, move forward, because if anything, all of that money is for the children.
And that is correct, and as I stated a few earlier, the idea of being fiscally responsible is important, but we also make sure that our programs and that we keep moving forward with our strategic blueprint. And so we have infused and have taken opportunities through ESSER funding and other areas, even to the SPED department to procure resources. And so we could definitely look into the information that was shared with you, but to the idea of we're actually looking and proposing, and it's a little later in my presentation, but I was going to kind of share some of the programs that we're working on as we move forward to the next school year.
Thank you.
So the next presentation will, as I shared with you, it's page 6 of your booklet. Ms. Lisa Estrada Batson will be giving you an overview of the work that has been done as we evaluate and explore opportunities of funding that we're leaving on the table with our average daily attendance.
And to preface this, the projection to Ms. Aguirre's point was 90% for our district. I think we're right around 80, I think it's 87%, correct?
87.
87, so looking at every percentage point being $3 million, that's roughly $9 million that we budgeted for that we didn't meet. And so I know that when we had the discussion about attendance a couple months ago, it was what are the steps to recoup that cost? And this is kind of showing the work that's been done to date. So why it's in the budget conversation is because if we don't recapture this ADA at some point, it's going to catch up to us because we're leaving substantial amounts of dollars on the table.
Yes, sir, that's correct. Good morning, President Irobali and members of the board, leadership, cabinet. We have before you, just to give you a little bit of a background on the causes of truancy, just so that we can kind of have a global perspective on what's actually causing the high number of unverified on our attendance at each of our campuses. So anything that's happening at home or at school or just personally with our kids on a day-to-day basis, that's really affecting either their truancy or their compulsory attendance. So just wanted to put that into perspective. Right now, we do have a very high volume of unverified attendance calculations that are happening at the campus level. When I am new, I'm freshly new, green to the campus, to the district, but that was about almost 3 months ago. We were, as President Irobali stated, at 87% ADA. We have since hired a director for our student retention and our truancy prevention department, Ms. Iris Jimenez, and since then we've been working together to mitigate the issues that we're having with the unverified. So right now, you are correct, 87%. As of Friday, we were at 89%, and just to, because I can't hold this in much longer. Just this morning, working with analytics and our department, I can report to you that we're at 92.6% today. Just with the information that we've been pushing out. Yes, I know, I can feel the energy from, but our goal is still 94%, but we have put out a lot of structures and expectations with our amazing Alpha team and our wonderful principals. Just through the process over the course of the last 3 months, just meeting with principals, meeting with Alpha team members, hiring our amazing director, and just pulling together within our own SPS team with our lead attendance clerk, just really just getting to know what's needed at the campus level. This has really been an amazing mini journey, if you will, just trying to help put things into order and identify our root causes, and then just working to just rectify where we're currently at. And I do want to say that we do have some great campuses out there, our high schools. I do want to give a shout out, if you will, to Irvin High School. They have some great systems in place for attendance, and so I've spoken to Mr. Stives already because we're going to be looking at him once we start the new year so that we can look at their feeder, look at what they're doing, and then hopefully put together a structure that's going to be implemented hopefully across the district so that we can continue to move that needle above 94%. I have shared with Ms. Saavedra that I'm pretty competitive when it comes to that, and so 94 is just a starting point. We're looking at hitting much higher. So I don't know if I need to go on with the rest of the slides, but
Quick question, that 92%, is that year-to-date? I mean,
year-to-date, 92.6%, yes, sir.
Wow, wow, well
Yes,
done.
sir. And again, that is attributed to just the support that I've received in my infancy here at EPISD, and also being able to hire a director, and also, of course, Mr. Sheffield working and just giving the support to run with it and just kind of work and kind of see what works and what doesn't, and putting structures into place. But it's just the beginning, and I'm just very proud of our principals and our attendance clerks and our team at SPS, and also our Alpha team. They're amazing. It's just learning to work together, and they're doing a great job. They're doing a great job. So our current plan right now, which is on page 9, is basically, we do have our Alpha teams deploying to help some of our campuses that have the higher unverified attendance. We want to make sure that we are putting our resources available to those campuses that are in a higher need to clean up some of the unverified attendance numbers. So we do have those teams already deployed, and I think that's why we're seeing some of those numbers move up just a little bit. Also, training for all new attendance clerks. As soon as we are, I'm working very closely with HR to make sure that as we start hiring attendance clerks, we do have a little bit of a turnover, but as we hire them, making sure that we get them the training that they need prior to being placed at the campus, so that they're not going in blind. They're going in with connections and a little bit of support and experience, so they can feel a little bit more comfortable when they get there. Also, the attendance committee meetings are happening monthly now. That's where our administrators are meeting with their teams, their registration, their attendance teams. Sorry, I have registration on my mind. Their attendance teams, and they're working together just to kind of, put into place what they're seeing on a monthly basis, and they have standard agenda items now that they're going to have to be addressing every month. And so those are the things that we're putting into place, but they've already started that, and as well as the attendance notifications of the NOA letters that go out, and also the 45-day plans that are required. So we're monitoring all of that. We're putting things into place for the upcoming year to include the 24-24 plan of beginning, middle, and end-of-year trainings with intermittent trainings monthly, just to show support, and for our clerks, making sure that they have someone to turn to, a place to ask questions. Right now, just in the chats that we have going on through our teams, it's been really good, reaching out. I've been able to answer some of the questions, getting to know them, and letting them feel like, they can ask questions, and they can ask for help, and there's no shame in that. And sometimes we just need to be okay with asking for help. Also on the plan here, we have monthly meetings for our administrators that oversee attendance. And as I mentioned, onboarding the training for new clerks for administration included, as well as the attendance clerks, and also making sure that we're training in those positions for their roles and responsibilities, including alphas, just so that everybody knows what their responsibilities are, what their role is when it comes to attendance, what their role is with supporting students and supporting our families as well. For parent communication and reporting, we want to make sure just in speaking to the campuses, we want to make sure that in the future that our parents have easy access to submit documentation for their students' absences, making it something that is easy to do, whether it's through, so that includes the marketing tools that are in the next bullet, having QR codes for our parents, either for their stickers on their cell phones, magnets that they can place on their refrigerators, basic things. We have an amazing print shop that we can certainly utilize their skills and their services to push all this out to our families, so that it's easy and they don't have to look for, who do I call, and I don't have time to look for the number, or I don't know what to do, or, we want to explore those options. And so we have kind of a plethora of ideas that we want to explore as we move forward into the new year. And finally, the systems and the processes. We want to make sure that those monthly attendance meetings are happening, that we are looking at those agendas, that the stated items are happening on a monthly basis, that we're not skipping any mandatory items that need to be discussed or addressed, and then that those issues that we do discuss are being addressed. There's minutes that are going to be taken that are going to have follow-up action plans too, internally at the campus level. The utilization of one-pager attendance reconciliation, what my team and I have discovered is that sometimes principals don't know what to ask on a daily basis. They don't know what to ask on a weekly basis. They don't know how to prep for our internal SPS audits that we do for attendance or even for discipline. But we want to be able to arm them with the questions that they need to ask, the look-fors, so that they feel a little bit more comfortable also with what they're viewing, and what the data looks like at their campus. We want them to feel comfortable with that. So we're preparing that as well. And that's going to help them verify those attendance codes across the board. And then finally, we are taking a look at an additional attendance notification system to help us support the ADA. And just to make sure that when we are communicating with our parents, that we are doing it with a little bit more finesse, I think, so that doesn't feel so punitive. Some cases, maybe it does need to feel that way, but really to be able to reach out to our community and say, hey, you're our partners, we need your help. So this particular notification system is something that we're currently looking into so that we can just kind of better manage the way we communicate to our community or with our community. So those are the plans. That's the plan for the upcoming year. There's a lot of work still to be done. But we're well on our way, and I know that we're going to be able to, hopefully by the end of the year, this school year, hit that 94%.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations. 2 months in, I'm really excited for your next update because what are you going to do for 6 months from now? I know that attendance has been a significant challenge for our district, not just because of the budget, but because of the exemption that we had due to our district of innovation status. And we always had a lot of questioning, or at least I did, about where we would strike a balance between trying to get that graduation rate up and also holding students accountable. And really accountable is a wrong word, but also addressing some of the significant challenges that came with chronic absenteeism. And so I really love that you all are having these monthly attendance committee meetings. One of my most valuable experiences as an educator was serving on the attendance committee meeting when we had to look over the files of every student who were not meeting those thresholds for attendance, because it really humanized students, and you went from a statistic to a story, and I think that's really important. So I wonder if perhaps there might be an opportunity to include teachers as part of the process, not just to address how we code unverified absences, but also to really go from statistic to story, so that we're digging a little bit deeper into why our students aren't coming to school, and also so that teachers have a little bit of that insight. I can tell you some of my students going through those stories, I was not aware of some of the things that they were experiencing. So I think there may be an opportunity there, and I'm just kind of saying out loud, but have you explored, and I see where you've kind of just hit the ground running and kind of took care of the issue without addressing DOI, but have you explored that 90% attendance, and what are your thoughts on how that affects our attendance / graduation rates kind of coming into this?
I think that, first of all, it's great to have teachers on the attendance committee, and that is something that we are putting together as part of, at the beginning of the year when teachers sign up, or when we try to recruit teachers to be part of different committees at the campus, to be able to say, we need teachers, they should be part of that committee. I mean, in my experience as well, they always have been, and it really builds great connections with students when you can see them, because as they're older too, they come in and you can talk to them about, hey, what's going on, like what, and you get to really hear the story, see the story, and so that's very important. So speaking to your first point, I think it's important that we add that for the upcoming year as maybe a requirement. Our teachers should be part of that. Yes, ma'am. As far as the 90% rule, I've lived in both worlds where the 90% is there. It is a huge task when you follow the 90% rule. You basically lose an administrator because that's all they do all day. There is a way, maintaining where we're currently at, to look at maybe a hybrid model is what we're being the fact that we just got our director, we're kind of starting off with those conversations and bouncing those ideas around, but perhaps maybe a hybrid model where we meet in the middle, so that after so many absences, then we can look at having that additional, because the 80%, the 90% rule is tied into the mastery of the content as well. So if the students are not there, they're not getting the instruction, so they're not mastering the content. But if we are working with a hybrid model, then we can look at those absences. We can look at maybe giving a little bit of leeway to understand that some of our students, we're still under the District of Innovation, but to give our students a little bit of leeway. But then, and I'll just throw a number out there, let's just say 10, right? 10 absences. After 10 absences, then they need to start regaining that seat time in order to get the instruction so that they can master the content. It's a kind of a vicious cycle. So I've been on both ends of that, but to be able to explore it, I think we're just in the beginning stages, and it is something that we want to continue to look at, just kind of play with certain outcomes, long-term. Yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you. Keep up the great work.
Yes, ma'am.
This message would have been for our superintendent, but since she's not here, but maybe Mr. Sheffield can fill us in, or Martha. On page 8, there, on this section, there's a team 1 and 5 are missing investigators. Is there a way we can fill in that gap with investigators for those two groupings as well?
Mrs. Estrada, you skipped this slide. Would you mind jumping into this and kind of explaining your rationale behind the staffing that you have for the?
Sure, yes, sir. On
teams.
page 8?
Yes, ma'am.
So these are the deployments that we were able to put together. We did add the investigators. We only have 3 attendants or resident investigators, so we wanted to kind of work with who's going to be where. For example, we did add one to Team 3, an investigator there, because there's probably going to be, they have a higher number of unverified absences, and so the attendance investigator there would help with doing some home visits, so that we can secure maybe some responses from home. And that's why we place the investigators at our higher need campuses, just because we want to make sure that we can knock off some of those numbers and push them out into the community. And so that was the logic behind that, since we only have 3 currently. But we really wanted to do 5 teams so that we could start moving that needle to a little bit higher. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Aguirre, do you think we're going to be able to get investigators for Team 1 and 5?
So I think, and
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Batson, correct me if I'm wrong. So these teams were created right now. They're existing employees with their role, but the intention was so that we could catch up on unverified absences for the year. The idea will be that next year, the systems that Ms. Estrada Batson is working on to implement, so our campuses stay on top of these verifications.
Correct.
Will lessen the need to have these teams develop to clear verifications. So this is like to fix where we are right now.
So it's possible that these investigators could help Team 5 and Team 1?
Correct.
Okay,
And they
that's
will,
all I
ma'am,
need.
and they currently do. The investigators help all the campuses as of right now, but this was a special deployment team that we put together to go out into our community to work with our campuses to help, get those numbers lowered just a little bit. But after this, at the beginning of the year, the 3 investigators currently are working very well. But right now, it's just, it's part of our current plan to help end the year strong. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so the last thing I'd want to, from my perspective, as a parent, I know a lot of us are parents in this district. The only thing I ask is, as we look at this, there's 2 things. I don't want to conflate the issue, right?
Yes.
There's absent students, unverified absences, and there's truancy. And so as we kind of approach this as a district, I hate just throwing everyone into this lump sum of truancy and then, putting that on the pressures, the parents to kind of deal with. I do think it's fear-mongering, I'll tell you that.
Yes,
I think we have a lot of parents that are engaged in trying to fix these things. So as we look at that, I just ask that you kind of take those approaches. And just the board hears the same conversation we had on Friday. As we look at the low-hanging fruit and what the responsibility of the district is to include our extracurricular activities, I think that we really need to clean that up, because last year, I want to say my son ended the school year with 3 or 4 unexcused absences that were because of school activities. This year, I think he has 1 that, is result of student activities. I know Trustee Hanani has kids in sports, and then the other trustees have their kids in extracurriculars. I don't want that to be an impact in those parents to get that call out every time saying, hey, get ready for truancy court because you have 3 unexcused absences that are a byproduct of the district or things of that nature.
Absolutely, yes,
So as we
sir.
move forward, especially with our rhetoric, I would like to start seeing us separate those issues, because My understanding was our data is so conflated and just raw right now that we really don't know what our absentee issues are. Students, cycles, kind of that story and narrative, is that correct?
Yes,
And
okay, absolutely, yes, sir.
Thank you. So, the reason, so I wanted to reiterate, the reason we felt it important to bring in the discussion of ADA and what we're currently doing to support our, not, and it's important that student learning takes place when the student's present. And in addition to that, as we see the financial forecast and the less revenue that is projected due to the ADA percentages, we thought it important to also share, well, what are we doing to fix this problem? And so I included it within the forecast because we wanted it to make sure that everybody understood that right now, there's teams out there working very hard to clear up and get us to a better level above that 88 days if we have additional revenue generated through the verification, absence verifications. So as we move on to the next section, it's a quick overview that Mr. Walt Byers, our treasurer, will be providing on the 88th legislative session and what didn't happen.
Good morning, Mr. Obali, Mr. Sheffield, trustees. Last year, during the legislative session, Governor Abbott called 4 special sessions, and this is kind of a recap of what happened on the 4th session in November. One of the governor's highest priorities was to pass educational savings accounts. And what those are, they allow parents to opt out of local school districts and to use taxpayer dollars for private schooling. And in exchange for the ESAs, they offered some additional school funding. So there was a Senate bill that offered about $5.2 billion more for the schools through the basic allotment. And then they also offered a pass-through and pay increases from $3,000 to $10,000. What's interesting about that $3,000 to $10,000, the $3,000 was for the larger school districts, and the $10,000 was for school districts under 5,000 ADA, and that was targeting the rural school districts where they wanted to get those votes. There was also some House bills, $6.4 billion, also through the basic allotment and also with pay increases. All these, the basic bills did pass in the Senate, but they were all voted down in the House of Representatives. But what this means for us is that state funding for next year, for 2025, is going to be very flat. So, okay. This is, we showed this last time, but we wanted to show it again. This is the impact of on a homestead with a average value residence with a homestead exemption over the last 5 years. So it shows the 5 entities there: the city of El Paso, the county, El Paso ISD, the community college, and UMC. And so over that period, you can see everybody's tax bill increased for the other entities, but it dropped for us by $448. The net was a $346 increase on an average value residence. The reason for the decrease was 2 things. Over the 5 years, we had tax compression every year. So it started at $1.06, and now we're at about 83 cents M&O tax rate. And there was also the homestead exemption, which went from $25 to $40 to $100,000.
So it's also important to note that that homestead exemption that was passed for our property owners of $100,000 is only applicable to school districts. So all these other entities did not see any impact from this homestead exemption. It only applies to our school districts.
Okay, thank you.
So as we move on to an update on our budget development process. The first slide, which is page 15, just gives you a synopsis of what we have been doing over the last couple of months. There's department hearings, a lot of reviews with different programs, and looking at staffing, campus staffing, listening to new initiatives, as Ms. Hernandez asked, what are we dropping things for the sake of financial stability? And so a lot of those conversations of where are we moving the needle to next year? What programs are we bringing? What does that cost? And what are we going to give up to make sure we can sustain what we are proposing? Oops. So the slide on page 17, page 16 is our, what I refer to as our general operating budget snapshot. Now, it says preliminary because we are not finished. If you recall from last month, Mr. Byers presented a detailed projection on our revenue. And what I can say, and it's the top box of that slide, the local budget, we're anticipating $41.5 million less than last year. And that one is primarily attributed to the homestead exemption and the $100,000 reduction to all our values here within the district. In our state revenue, we're projecting an increase of $32 million, and that is where, as we mentioned, as you can see there, it's not a dollar for dollar because the state is supposed to support and infuse dollars that are reduced from our property values, but it's not at the same level. But in our state revenue, we are projecting 990 students less than current year, so that's an impact to our ADA, obviously. And then on top of that 100,000. When we look at federal funds, as we mentioned earlier, our SHARs, we are anticipating a reduction in revenue based on the audit and the way we're going to report. And then on top of that, as ESSER goes away as well, we were generating revenue from indirect costs associated with the grant. Well, that is also, the grant ends in September, so all funding should be expended by then. So that's another impact to our revenue on the high level. When we look at our expenses, I have it broken down by campuses and departments. And so going back, we are anticipating $528.4 million in revenue, which is 14.4 less than current year. And when we look at our campus allocations, we have an allocation of $542.6 million in expenditures, which creates a shortfall of revenue of $14.2 million. So when I started this presentation, I specifically stated this is preliminary because I can share with you that we're still working to see what opportunities are we going to take to ensure that by the time June comes around, we present to you a balanced budget. So we move on to the next, before I forget. So some of the new initiatives that we're talking about, whether it's with general operating or taking advantage of our entitlement funds, is bringing Algebra for All program to the middle school. So that would be that our middle school students, not just some selective few, but all, majority of our middle school students are now taking algebra at middle school. Extended day programs, so that is also, we're looking to an expansion of having a total of 10 sites of extended day programs where we provide our parents support before and after school with those needs that they might have. It's important to note that within these extended day programs, we are actually feeding our students supper. And so that's something that doesn't always happen with a lot of other programs that we have in place. So that's another expansion there. The fine arts expansion at elementary. So we're looking to expand the opportunities for more different types of fine arts and not just your typical choir, band, and choir, orchestra, and art, and bringing in more to opportunities there. The Kickstart program that we currently have at 2 existing campuses, we're also looking to expand that opportunity across. So we're looking, our focus is a little bit more on the elementary middle and giving them more experiences as they move along. And of course, we also have to keep in mind our capital projects that we have for our facilities within a reasonable level that we can sustain within our district budget. So the next snapshot that you'll see is our food and nutrition fund. So Ms. Hernandez, just to clarify, and just so for your understanding, what we're doing is, what we need to keep in mind is the food and nutrition fund is completely separate from our general operating budget. It's a separate standalone fund. It's generated by the meals that we serve based on the Texas Department of Agriculture. I think it's also very important to say that when you also look at food programs throughout, not just the region, but the state, a lot of them are operating in a negative, more expenses than they do have revenue. And I have to say that the problem we're foreseeing or we're having to deal with is we have too much fund balance. So the TDA, the Texas Department of Agriculture, requires that you have a certain limit of fund balance only. We have more than we need. So that's allowing us to infuse dollars to open like kiosks where kids can kind of do a grab and go type of, if they don't want to wait through the lines of a formal meal, it'll be a condensed or a different variation of foods. They have invested in different types of menu options. They have meatless Mondays, so that's attracting a different population that perhaps is wanting to have a different type of diet approach to their meals. We have a lot of different Asian bowls, and there's different menus that are being presented to help attract and improve on some of those processes. And I have to share that our extended day program will also benefit from some of the services our food and nutrition provides through the supper programs.
And are these expanded menus available at all levels, or is it just high schools or just middle schools, or?
So I would need to follow up on that. What I will share is I know there's committees that are created of students that sample meals that help them determine what to push forward. I want to say that they may have up to 4th and 5th grade potentially, but let me confirm on what the meal options are at all grade levels. So when you look at the food and nutrition program, the snapshot that we're anticipating is, we're anticipating $37.4 million in our revenue, which is $2.7 million more than we are currently operating on. And so we've proposed a balanced budget of $37 million, and it's all associated with the food and nutrition program. We cannot use it for any other purposes. The last of the budgets that the board approves based on Texas Education Code is the debt service fund. And as you As you are aware, the debt service fund is what the district utilizes to pay off any debt that is incurred when it comes to our bonds, previous bonds or financing approaches for our facilities, infrastructures. And so we're looking at, and if you recall, the debt service budget is based on what our debt payments are for that specific year. So we are proposing a budget of $54.3 million, which is $2.7 million less than current year. And again, that's aligned to our debt service. And then we've got a couple of other funds that are related to specific projects, financing tools that we've taken advantage for different lighting projects and things that have been brought to the board for approval in the past years. But it's the debt that we need to pay off.
Can you, just before you move on, because I have seen the other slides, but before we get into compensation, can you talk a little bit about where we're at with the funding model that's in the essential action or the lever 5, the equity funding model? I know that we have Artifact as a target based on recommendations from the equity study. My concern is that the equity study could take up to 2 years, and I feel there may be an opportunity to work in tandem with the vendor to allocate some funding based on whatever recommendations are happening as we go, rather than, I just don't want, because technically this could potentially be 3 years down the line that our students are seeing the benefits of what the strategic plan has initiated as being important. Can you talk a little bit about that? And if you feel now is not the right time, could we have maybe a separate slide on that for the next budget workshop, just kind of talking about what our plan is to address that specific?
I can certainly bring back in May a section to discuss how the equity plan will align to our budget, or in what efforts we've taken
Okay.
to this date. Because of course, as you are aware, we just started the work.
Yeah.
And so the idea is, although we just started the work with a consultant, we as a cabinet leadership, we have been working to be more specific and critical on how do we ensure that equity is in the forefront of all our planning as we move forward. But I can bring something to you in May.
Perfect. I just don't want that to be what we're waiting for, because you're right, the work is already happening and has been happening, and so I would love to have a better briefing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Hanani, you meant that through the debit service fund? Is that what you're speaking of?
In the general operating.
Oh, but we're not there yet.
We passed it.
We're talking about the superintendent's recommendations for the budget, so she's about to talk about compensation. I just wanted to ask that question before she started talking about teacher compensation.
Oh, but I thought we were in the debt service fund still.
Yes. So the first of the snapshots I presented was the general operating, page 16.
Right.
Yeah, and so I think she was just wrapping it up before we moved on to the next content. Yeah.
Oh, I was just confused.
So as we move on through our presentation, Ms. Patricia Cortez, Human Capital Management Officer, will be providing you with an overview of our employee pay and any conversations on compensation.
Thank you, Ms. Aguirre. And good morning, Mr. Ribali, board members, and Mr. Sheffield. As we've heard of the discussion today, and we've talked about the initiatives that have been important to the district, we know that compensation, it remains a priority for the district. But I first want to reiterate what we've heard today from others at the table, that it really has been the collaboration and the strategic planning that has taken place along with the board, Ms. Saavedra, and a leadership team to really identify how to move forward with our initiatives and how to be fiscally responsible and really reap the benefits, as Mr. Call mentioned. And so we remain with that focus in mind, that we have to continue to look at compensation as a priority, but we need to do it in a manner that we're able to sustain and that we have a long-term plan. And I think that's worked well for us. As we've identified the last 2 years, we very strategically and methodically did apply raises as we knew this district could sustain. And so we want to continue with that path moving forward, knowing that it has to be balanced along with all the other initiatives that we have in mind. There's also been work done in terms of ensuring that we're looking at the culture of the district. We're looking at the employee's perspective on what that culture looks like. So there's just been a lot of work in the realm of just the overall environment for employees, and compensation is one very important piece. So I just really wanted to share that before we talk about compensation. And what we're sharing today is specific to teachers, to just kind of bring us back to the table in terms of the work we've done to really continue to try to be competitive. We realize that we are still not where we would like to be, but we continue to do the work to reach that goal. And so as you see at the table here, our salary for teachers is still under the market median. So again, we'll be bringing more information for you forward through the next budget workshops to see what further work we can do in this regard for compensation for teachers. The median, if you see here, is 61,253, and our median salary is 60,182. And to take you further into the comparables with our local districts, you see here that, again, we are still falling short from our starting teachers. And then you have the comparables there for our 5-year and our 10-year teachers. So again, this is work that we're still continuing to do, and we're evaluating to identify what we may be able to bring forward as a recommendation. As we have in the past, we emphasize the health savings account, which has been also a very important aspect of what we provide to our employees. As noted here, the other district that does provide a health savings account contribution is Socorro ISD at $600, comparable to ours at $1,000.
If I might interject, I also think it's important to note that as we look at the current financial standing of a lot of our school districts, not just regionally, but around the state, you know, healthcare costs are significant. You know, we infuse $51 million of our operating budget to healthcare. And so when you think of that, and as you all are aware, we transitioned from the TRS plan to our self-funded plan a couple of years ago. Now, that was a very big commitment that the board took on, as we knew that that was going to be very helpful to our teachers, because we could have a very high starting pay for teachers, but if we're under a healthcare program that pulls a lot of funds just to have a program, participate in the program, that's a negative impact to our employees. And so I think that it's important to note that where other districts are considering leaving and going to TRS Active Care to be able to sustain their operations, we still hold true to having a strong healthcare fund for our employees to benefit from.
And
on
to add
that-
to that, on
I'm
the
sorry.
healthcare plan,
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that we have not had an increase to the employee contribution for the last 3 years also. So that's, again, looking at plan design and continuously monitoring how the health plan is doing.
Thank you, and that's great. But just kind of, since you're talking about healthcare, one of the concerns that I had with pushing the CDHP plan is that, just kind of based on the data, people are less likely to use mental health services when they're on a CDHP, because they kind of see that as being less of a necessity. I know that's something that I maybe briefly mentioned in the past, but just because teacher wellness is so important and mental health is important for everybody, students and teachers, can we kind of dig into that a little bit better, or a little bit more? I don't know if that data is available, Walt, to see kind of how many of our teachers are actually utilizing mental health services as part of CDHP. But if we see that there is a variance from a traditional healthcare plan, maybe there's an opportunity to kind of look to see how we can supplement mental health care services for teachers if indeed they're not taking advantage of that service because they're using a CDHP plan.
We can provide a further presentation on
Okay,
that at our
thank
next
you.
board workshop.
And we will have
Yeah, well, was this a?
Budget during this meeting.
Right, and that is definitely a budget, that's definitely a budget item, because my ask is that if there is a variance, then that may be explored as part of a separate budget item. So I just wanted to clarify that certainly. I'm talking about that specifically related to how it affects the budget.
correct. And I was stating that the healthcare program overview will be presented to the board in May from the.
So trustee Nana, just to be clear, your ask is to evaluate the existing CDHP plan, looking at the mental health capacity of what exists in the usage, and seeing if we need an additional allocation from our budget to supplement that to ensure that teacher mental health is being taken care of just as much, right? Okay, just want to make sure for the
You
record,
said it so nicely.
it always goes back to the budget, so yeah, okay. And
And
thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Ms. Hanani, I think that's a great idea. I mean, but if I could just, that's okay. The HSS plan, the HSA plan that we have, if anything, I'm gonna continue putting in a plug for it. It is very helpful for you as current employees, but for long-term, once you retire as well, and having that ability to dip into maybe another source of help that teachers could get into, I think that would be excellent. Because that HSA plan, even though they may not be using it now, it will help them in the future, and they may not see that it's helpful, but if we can get them to use it now, it would make their lives as well as everybody else's lives a whole lot better if they just utilized what's available for them.
Thank you.
And the next slide, just providing some comparables in terms of a cost impact if we look at any further compensation. So what's provided here is the cost associated with a 1% of midpoint and a 2% of midpoint. And it's broken down by your general operating, and of course, your food and nutrition, as Ms. Aguirre mentioned, is a standalone. And other funds would also be separate from your general operating fund. And there is just one clarification on the teacher starting salary that's cited on this slide. There is a correction there. The starting pay is $57,750. On slide 21, we have the teacher starting salary referenced at $57,500 right at the bottom. There is a correction there. It's $57,750. And so our pay systems review, the process we are going through right now is reviewing our pay tables, reviewing, of course, market analysis and pay groups and extra performance pay, which is your stipends and other types of additional pay.
Can I, a quick request, I guess, can we have an assessment of where we have the highest need or most in-demand positions or hardest to fill, however you want to put it? I think it would be great for us to know where we're having trouble filling positions, so that maybe we can evaluate that as we're looking at incentives specifically for educators.
Yes, we can do that.
A good example is the SLP conversation I know we've had, that's a very hard position to fill. And I know that when we were looking at a potential signing bonus retention stipend, we were told that we could not because there was no consideration coming from them. So I think that's something that I personally would like to kind of look at again as we look at, as a greater conversation, the SLP one for retention.
Yes.
At our next meeting in May, we will be reviewing more in detail some of the positions and information that we've identified through this review that we're doing right now.
President Elbaldi, can you explain what you just?
Yes, ma'am. So I don't have the time frame in my head. It's within the last year. I know that we had a conversation about looking at doing a retention stipend or a sign-on bonus for our high demand positions, SLPs being one of them. And in the conversation that I know that we had on the dais, that we were told because there's no consideration or increase to the workload or something of that nature, we were unable to do it because it'd be a gift of public funds. And we would have to wait for the next budget cycle. So as we're in this new budget cycle, really evaluating those high demand positions that we really need help in and looking at what kind of stipend, pay increases, whatever we need to do to make it at market level or incentivize people to pursue those opportunities with the district. And then Ms. Aguirre and Ms. Cortez, I guess if you guys can answer this question, I just want to be very clear on this. The first thing is if we look at a 1 or 2%, this is across the board. This is not just for teachers, correct? The comparative in all the analysis was teacher pay, but as we look at this last side, it's employees of the district.
That is correct.
Okay. And then the other question I have, and just because I want to get ahead of it, I just want to be very clear. At this time and looking into next year, EPISD is not considering layoffs. We're not considering pay freezes, decreases. We're not looking at significant changes to our medical care plan. We're not looking at any of these drastic measures as we finish our existing fiscal year, but then also enter the next fiscal year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So as we move on to the last section of our presentation, it's really an overview of our calendar. And as you can see, there's been a lot of work that has been done, and we have we have 2 more budget workshops scheduled for May 7th and then June 4th, with the goal to adopt the budget on June 18th. As I mentioned, in May, we'll be bringing you an update on the healthcare fund. We'll be doing a more detailed review of our compensation or our analysis that we've been doing. And then we will also be providing you more solid numbers as to where we are with the budget as we continue moving forward. And that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our meeting, and we will adjourn at 10:34. Thank you, everyone.